Mandy, can you go ahead and put the agenda up? All right, it's 9:30. This is the Assembly's Reapportionment Committee meeting for Friday, January 28th, starting at 9:30. Madam Clerk, can you take the roll, please?
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Kennedy? I see Ms. Kennedy on, but I didn't hear her. Ms. Quinn Davidson? Here. Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
And then for Assembly members not on the committee, Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Zalatel? Thank you, Chair.
So I am suffering under the broadband limitations of having a single provider in our community for the most part. So if I am not being heard or coming across, it's because I'm having network issues. So can you hear me? Anybody?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Chris?
Yeah, perfect. No problem.
Okay, good. I keep getting
And if
bad
you need-
network quality.
And if you
Loud
need to
and
turn your
clear.
video off.
What was that, Ms. Quinn Davidson?
I was just going to say, if you need to turn your video off, we know you're here, so no worries.
Do that. Okay, so if I can be heard, I'm going to get started. We have on the agenda today a review of feedback from last night, discussion of plan for assembly introduction, and then a general update. And so I was hoping that we had some record from last night's meeting that we can kind of present to folks, but if we don't, I think it's just kind of open forum for discussion about the town halls that we had. So does anybody want to kind of discuss what we heard?
You know, Chris, Claire sent out a document that listed the comments. Did you get that last night?
I probably did. Let's see. Andy, do you have that document?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis, if I might be recognized.
Absolutely, you have the floor, Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you. The document that was sent out yesterday for the agenda might be the summation of the smart comments that we've collated from the online public comment portal and not necessarily from the town hall last night.
That's right. So I definitely saw the one from the smart comments. Ms. Ross?
I could speak to that. So Ms. Honest has the report that I sent out. And I did append at the back, there's an appendix with some of the raw data, and I did include the report that Mr. Wheeler is talking about with the comments. But this document I sent out late last night. It is posted on the website for people who are following along on the phone. And it's obviously written at the midnight hour, but a summary of all of the work we've done so far and the comments we've received and some of the themes of the discussions.
Why don't you go ahead and walk us through the document, Claire? And I would just note for the record, Ms. Kennedy is now back with us in full.
Okay. So this first page is just summarizing all of the work we've done so far. And then the second page is our timeline that I just wanted everything that we have in one place. So the second page is our timeline and a list of the presentations we've made so far. And then I think in the third page is where we get into the summaries of the town halls. And in this first section, we didn't take verbatim notes. These are just kind of themes and some of the big things that came out. But if you want to see verbatim notes in the appendix, we put the all of the written comments that have been submitted through the portal, all of the comments that we collected in the Q&A section from the virtual town hall, and then the written comments that were made on the maps last night. So this part has, I don't think we need it for discussion today, but just for future reference, the public map makers who made comments about why they did their maps, that's in there. And then scrolling down to the next page, oops, up one more, Mandy. We captured some, there's a lot of comments based on neighborhood, so the page B, page 4 has some of, oh, sorry, maybe it was page, sorry, you're fine. I'll get to that part later. This next section is just some of the questions that have come up. In some cases, we have answers that were made during the process. There are a couple questions that haven't been answered yet, so we can fill this in as we go. And then a couple quotations that kind of captured some of the big themes that we heard. Then on the next page, these are what I was talking about earlier, the neighborhood specific comments. Then we can go to the next page, and there's some map specific comments. And then I put all of the maps. These are lower resolution PDFs, but I thought it might be handy for members if you wanted to print this out to be able to have all the maps in a printable version so you could flip through them for this conversation. And so you can just stop scrolling there, Mandy. This has all the maps. And then, like I mentioned, there's an appendix at the end that has the raw data. I also have links to all the press releases we've done and our PR materials. So my idea is just to build on this report over time where we can keep adding. And then at the end of the process, we can make it an official report that we put into the record. And then 10 years from now, when the next group of people is going through this process, they'll have this document to reference. For today's conversation, I can type in the chat some of the discussion points that came up last night that might be what you want to talk about today. I guess I'll read them into the record too, but I'll post them into the chat so people can see them. It seemed to me the big sticking points that we had discussions over were the deviation numbers, and that's the total deviation per map. It can be as high as 10% according to the law, but there was a discussion about whether it's good to stay further towards the 0 end, or if it's okay to have a larger deviation if you're doing it to keep communities together. So that's one discussion point. Communities of interest came up, and whether that's by geographical, by income, by ethnic data, by other types of identifications. How do you keep those groups together, and what groups are more important to keep together than others if you have to split up groups? I think the big question is who Eagle River goes with, since that district doesn't get up to 45,000 on its own. Does it go with the bases? Does it go with Girdwood? Does it go with South Anchorage? Does it go with Muldoon? So those are questions. And then it also came up, a lot of neighborhoods feel like they identify as being together, and they might be split up in this process. And so which neighborhoods should be kept together? Is it okay to split up some of those neighborhoods? Some of the ones I noticed were Rogers Park, Airport Heights, Sand Lake, Campbell Lake, perhaps Abbott Loop or Independence Park came up as well. So those are some of the, and there might be more if anyone wants to add, but I think those are some of the questions that need to be figured out for this process to help you figure out which map you want to select to move forward.
Thank you. And I want to put on the table the possibility of us rescinding the motion that we made at the last meeting to put forward a map at this time for a number of reasons that I'll get into when we get to that part of the conversation. But for now, I have Ms. Quinn Davidson in the queue.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I was just thinking after some of the testimony last night, and I thought that there was a really interesting conversation last night, mostly about Eagle River and how do you match communities and what are the top priorities in deciding where these boundaries should be. And I'd like to hear from Dean or Dennis, if it's appropriate, about how we as a body weigh these concepts of lower deviation is better, but also, potentially communities of interest or, compactness. What does compact mean? Is everywhere compact in Anchorage? Like, I guess I want to hear those standards fleshed out a little bit as they apply to the maps that we've been looking at. And also just hear some opinions from the legal folks about how we weigh all of those things to come to a conclusion. And I guess while you're at it, if there are any of the 10 maps that you're looking at and you say, I think that this map has significant legal problems, I would like to know that as well. Thanks.
So now, is Dean on the chat? I don't know. Let's see, I don't see Mr. Gates.
Chris, this is one of the interpreters. This is Brenna. Dean is just signing on, but he's just having some problems right now. So he will be there in just like a minute.
Thanks, Brenna. So Austin, I might need you to re-ask the question. And again, I want to be very plainly clear. Dennis Wheeler is not our legal aid in this. We're not hiring him as an attorney, but he did perform initial screening with Ashley. And so, Dennis, do you want to speak about the screening methodologies and any thoughts you might have about what the question just was asked?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will start by quoting from a Alaska Supreme Court case that came out in 2002. And in that case, the court said that newly available technologies make it possible to get very low deviations, especially in urban areas. The court said, quote, Anchorage is by definition socio-economically integrated, and its population is sufficiently dense and evenly spread to allow multiple combinations of compact, contiguous districts with minimal population deviations. So clearly, at least if this goes to that level of debate and discussion, the court will be looking at deviation as a significant factor, which is not to say that it's the only factor, as I mentioned last night. So I think it'll be important for Dean to kind of outline the criteria a little bit for you. So you have a federal level 10% deviation, which is a presumption only. So, we're going to have to be under that if we're going to comply with state law requirements. And then you look at what does it mean to be socially, economically integrated and compact, contiguous, et cetera. So I think the Alaska Supreme Court is signaling it's going to expect a very low deviation absent some very compelling reasons otherwise. And one of those I mentioned was the issue of minority voting power. But I think it would be appropriate for Dean to outline that more closely as you delve into the fine details of deviation versus neighborhood concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dennis, could you do us a favor and email to us that Supreme Court decision? Or at least that section that you just highlighted?
Sure, no problem.
All right, and so before we go to Ms. Allard for her question, Mr. Gates is in the queue. Dean, do you want to take a stab?
Well, good morning. I think that Dennis explained very well, and especially that quote from the 2002 case. It really illustrates that, at least in our jurisdiction, the municipality of Anchorage, there's not going to be, I think, too much of an issue about not being socially, economically integrated wherever you draw the lines. But I also thought that where you do draw them, it needs to show that it's not like designed to dilute minority voting power. And, you know, there's, I think, a extensive and complicated data analysis to figure out whether or not voting power of minorities is diluted. To be quite honest, I think the most logical way to figure out the question you asked was Quinn Davidson, you know, where do you draw the lines and how do you evaluate those standards being compact, socially, economically integrated, is with the proposed maps. And as you have the public discussion at your town halls and public hearings, what you hear from the public, and usually they members of the public have some critical points, and it's those points that would illustrate, oh, here's the problem with this one or that boundary, or the social economic integration of putting it here. So it's not really, I think, I'm not really able to tell you what those problems are, but the members of the community will point them out, and then we can analyze what their points are, what the problems are with a certain boundary in a proposal. So I think that's all sort of rolled into this whole reapportionment process. And one of the reasons it was a good idea to have 2 public hearings on this, as well as the town halls, and have those several maps out there early.
Dean, I want to clarify something you said. You said that it would be illegal or not an acceptable map if it were designed to reduce minority voting power. But is it designed to, or is it in effect does, right? Because when you say designed to, that implies an intent versus an action.
Yes, that's a good point, Mr. Constant. A nice catch of the 2 different standards of review there. For sure, you don't want them designed to do that. This is all the Voting Rights Act jurisprudence rules, and it does have the effects of diluting minority voting power. So, well, you can't do it like inadvertently. Whoops, you diluted some minority voting power here by too much. I think that I would give a better answer if I had some time to look back at some of the case law that I had reviewed about 10 years ago.
You know, I think if I had some time, it's going to be a theme of today, which we'll come to towards the end. So thank you, Dean. Miss Allard, you were in the queue.
Can I?
Thank you. I
Oh,
appreciate
can
that.
go
wait.
after-
Oh, I'm
One
sorry.
sec. Let's let Austin finish up. Go ahead, Austin.
I can go after Jamie too. That's fine.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just, yeah.
Your choice.
Are you sure, Austin? I don't mind.
Oh, okay, it's related to this. Thanks, Jamie. I guess I'm trying, and maybe it's just that Mr. Gates needs some more time, and that's fine. But I would like our lawyers to look at these maps and give us any legal advice they have. And if the answer is, you know, all of these maps by definition, as you know, are fine, it's up to you to decide. That's helpful. But it still feels a little murky to me based on the advice we've received. And maybe that's because any of them are an option and it's really up to us. But I think that would be helpful. It doesn't have to be today if we're not making.
So Austin, if I might point back to Dennis again. Dennis, you didn't describe your vetting criteria for these maps. So maybe, you know, without going down the line of the legal question, talk about the vetting process for the maps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We basically started with the premise that we would definitely want to be under the 10% federal requirement. And after that, you know, it's really a question of how close to zero in deviation do you want to get. So for us, it was just making sure it cleared that first hurdle for all these maps.
So it was only the issue of the deviation. That was the only screening criteria you used.
Correct. So we certainly can layer in such things as minority voting data, but we figured we would do that once the committee narrowed down its choices, so we weren't wasting effort working on those details on maps that weren't going to move forward.
Okay, thank you. That's a helpful answer. Is that for now an okay answer that we'll come back to this point, Austin?
Yeah, that sounds great. As long as, you know, if we're going to meet again to talk about this, that we're able to talk through that more. I think it's really important for us to have that advice from Dean.
And so from my perspective, what I would like to call that is a review of screening criteria that assembly members can use to make the decision.
Yeah, that sounds great.
That's how I would frame that to and have legal advice on screening criteria.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thanks again, Ms. Al. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Sally, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I just have a few comments, and I hope everybody, you know, and I'm gonna get the numbers for the demographics. I'm gonna get the numbers so the socioeconomics. But Eagle River as a whole represents 25% of the military within the state of Alaska. And what I mean by that is we are one of the most highly impacted states when it comes to military presence. So last night I heard a few comments in regards, well, why would Eagle River, you know, get dibs on, or however they put it, J-Bear. So it goes into a little bit more detail. And part of that detail is that socioeconomically, demographically, and contiguous, the J-Bear aligns exactly with Eagle River. But the minority individuals that live on J-Bear, I've never been a part of an organization with such diversity until I joined the military. And when you take J-Bear away from the district lines we currently have, you will absolutely impact the demographics and the minority votes. And I think that's really important to point out, because if there is a way that we end up not having a contiguous line as population wise. So yes, I understand the range goes down, and technically land mass wise, we are connected to Hillside. And I even think Girdwood. The problem that you're running into is it's not contiguous, it's not compacted, and it's socioeconomically, I don't know if we are right on par with them, Hillside and Girdwood, but the demographics aren't there. So that the diversity of the minority votes have been taken out of Eagle River, and Hillside and Girdwood don't have that. So I think that's one of the reasons, a powerful reason is why the state had left J-Bear there. But I was trying to figure out how, if J-Bear in Fort Richardson, Elmendorf is completely removed from Eagle River, how are the maps going to be drawn to least impact us as a whole? Because I'm representing Chugach Eagle River and the municipality as a whole. And every time I go back listening, I watched and listened to redistricting and our reapportionment, the least impactful is by leaving as many districts intact as possible, like Midtown, us. I know West is very limited on the movement because of where West Anchorage is located and how it's positioned. So I just want to make sure that we really, really move our district lines as least as possible, because you'll dilute the impacted groups. And I just don't want to see people get lost in the cycle because of population diversity. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this, but I hope you guys take that into consideration, that when I say you guys, the committee, the Assembly as whole, because the people, and I'll get the numbers to show the demographics. And I think people would be quite shocked on how much the J-Bear brings as minority into Eagle River. It's super important. And I'm just repeating myself as a broken record right now, but I hope you guys will see that, and I'll get numbers for everybody. I'm working on it, and to bring, you know, the three maps that I feel would least impact Eagle River and the district as a whole. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Next in the queue is Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a comment and then a question, and they go to the last two comments. First, I'll address what Ms. Allard just said. I think I agree with her and some of the commenters last night that the idea of putting Girdwood into District 2 to me doesn't seem practical. But I do think that putting all or part of J-Bear into District 1 and making it North Anchorage District makes a lot of sense for a variety of reasons. One, because the people who actually live on base there have more demographically similar with the people that are just outside the gates there. Many of them attend elementary school and, of course, Bartlett High School. The children do that are in that area. I'll say also, we talk about disrupting the district lines, and if you take J-Bear all or part and put it downtown, it looks like this huge change, and it is geographically, but demographically, if you don't do that, we have to grapple with the fact that District 1 has to expand, it has to double in size, and if you don't use all or part of J-Bear, then you're consuming a tremendous amount of Midtown, and that was something that really stuck out to me. Also East Anchorage, but I think that is a little bit less disruptive, but you have to consume a tremendous amount of what was historically Midtown, push Midtown south, and while on the map it doesn't look as disruptive because it's geographically smaller, the demographics really do change, or I should say the sort of historical neighborhood continuity really changes. And so, for me, I know one of the priorities I'll be taking forward as this comes to the floor is that Rogers Park and all or part of Airport Heights remains in Midtown. And, I represent East Anchorage, but I live quite close there, and I share some community councils with the Midtown District, and I just appreciate how incredibly disruptive that would be to remove those neighborhoods. So going back, though, to the points that Ms. Quinn Davidson made and the attorneys as well. So I have spoken with some folks involved on the state side with redistricting, just to get a sense of kind of what's happening over there. And two things sort of stuck out. One was I know I was talking to someone who's again involved in the state level redistricting, and they were looking at our maps. And they were saying this is a level of deviation that just would not be accepted at the state level. That yes, 10% is like this federal guideline, but nobody ever gets anywhere close to that in maps that aren't thrown out at the state level. And so there were a number of maps last night that just were not acceptable on that parameter. And then the other thing was they told me that they expect the litigation to come to a head or have a decision by about February 15th. And I was wondering if the attorneys had heard that, and then for the committee and for the attorneys, if, that decision, those decisions, if they will have any kind of guide or impact on what we do here. There are some novel legal theories being discussed in that litigation. And, do we need to hold off until we see what happens there before we move forward with our maps, at least in a final form? So I get that last question was for the attorneys.
And Mr. Dunbar, thank you. There's a number of questions that you asked in there, and certainly you raise a lot of important questions about the timeline and what happens with the state decision making. So Dean, do you have any insight to the timeline of the state case?
Quite honestly, I do not. Whenever the state does its redistricting, there's usually a number of parties, a number of litigants that challenge it. And I think if I understood right, that where we are right now, Superior Court, I mean, to be honest, I haven't been tracking the state cases, but I don't really need to. But the main factor with the states and its redistricting, well, I'm sorry, let me finish that thought. I would expect that the state cases to be appealed, get remanded, maybe something changed to the maps to follow the order on remand, and then maybe appealed again. So although February 15th is as out there as things coming to a head, I can't really say, oh yeah, that's going to be the end of it all, and can rely on whatever comes out of that process at that time. So we saw this 10 years ago. The state case went up and back to the Supreme Court and Superior Court, I think twice. But in general, the states and its process and where it finally ends up on its maps affects us primarily in one way. at least from a legal standpoint, and that's where the voting precinct lines are drawn. And voting precincts are a creature of poll-based voting, and we don't do that anymore. So it's not so much an issue of where's the precinct, where do you go to cast your vote, but we do have in place a resolution that says we should try to draw our assembly district lines so that they align with state voting precinct lines, and it helps to reduce, voter confusion and things like that. So as I understand it, when the state does its redistricting, and I could be wrong about this, when the state does its redistricting and that's all settled, then it redoes its voting precincts so that it aligns up with the House district boundaries, right? And again, I'm not saying that with complete confidence, but I think they do their precinct lines after. So that's really the only thing that we have to really that affects where we draw our lines. And then I would say that aside from that, of course, for residents and voters, it is quite convenient if their House representative and in the House district and Senate district sort of lines up with our assembly districts. But historically, that's not really possible to have them align our assembly district boundaries and state House boundaries simply because of the number and area and so forth. So it is, I guess, nice and convenient for the voters if they align more rather than less. So anyways, those are my thoughts, and I'm taking some notes so I can follow up with these issues.
And I'm going to add something to that. Forrest, I've been in discussions with a number of folks on this topic, and the best case scenario we get is we have district boundaries that we can base some of our lines off of, not precincts, because as Dean suggested, and it is in fact the case, the precinct boundaries come after all of the settling of the dust on the legal claims, the very specific matters. But I'm told by the clerk that we have a historic process of passing the reapportionment and then having a second cleanup process after the fact that just tidies the corners as best as possible to streamline and make most closely the lines line up as possible without making mass changes the second go around, but just on the margins. I see Mr. Wheeler has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to let you know in the chat, I'm sending the links to the 2 Supreme Court cases that I want the committee to be aware of. And in that, I pulled out a quote regarding Eagle River. So I wanted to just give the members a heads up. There's an interesting quote in there, and I didn't want to do it and disrupt somebody speaking on the issue. So I'm going to send that now. Thank you.
Chris, could I have one quick follow-up to what I said? Chris?
Go ahead, Forrest.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll just say, I don't think, obviously, we're not going to wait until the state completes all their process and all their appeals. I think there are 1 or 2 pretty big legal issues that might sort of, that we might need to take cognizance of after they are resolved. But I certainly do agree with the notion that we can't wait for the state completely, nor are we legally bound to do so. But the last point I'll just make is, Muldoon and kind of where Muldoon goes is also a big topic of last night. I'll just note that the state house seat, they drew a state house seat at the state level that goes Upper Muldoon, the Elmendorf side of J-Bear, and then Government Hill, very clearly creating that kind of North Anchorage district in the state level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And they also merged Government Hill with Eklutna on the Senate side. It's a very interesting process, and I'm very much looking forward to how that legal proceeding works out. So in the chat, Mr. Wheeler did just put in two links to Supreme Court decisions relating to reapportionment and the Eagle River quote. I'm just going to read it. Since Eagle River is of interest here, and this is from the case law from, I think it's redistricting cases 2002. That since Eagle River is of interest, here's a quote. This way, I'm just going to read the ruling. The Chugach Eagle River area is a socioeconomically integrated area that should not have been divided, and they object to this community being combined with other communities in House Districts 16, 18, and 32. While Eagle River Chugach area is socioeconomically integrated, its residents have no constitutional right to be placed in a single district. The only relevant related inquiry is whether the districts in which Eagle River Chugach was placed are socioeconomically integrated. That's the quote from Mr. Wheeler from the ruling of the Supreme Court in 2002. So now going back to the queue, I think, Ms. LaFrance in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question on process, namely the timeline. And this came up after yesterday's town hall when I was talking with some constituents from District 6 who live on the hillside. Given that the committee will not be recommending a map to the body today, when will debate on the maps occur? Will there be another committee meeting scheduled? And I realize debate is going on to some degree now. And for the record, I have been receiving some pretty strong responses from residents of the hillside area against being combined with District 2. And so again, there was the question from those folks, will there be another committee meeting scheduled specifically for discussion and debate among members regarding which specific map or maps to forward to the body? Thanks.
So for my part, I will answer the question that most necessarily has to be yes, but from a procedural perspective, I asked Dean for help on this. The committee made a motion and approved to send forward a single map for today. And I would ask by unanimous consent that the members of the committee agree that we dispatch with that motion that passed previously so that we allow instead all of these maps to go forward to the Chugach Eagle River group town hall, and we instead come back for a next committee conversation to sort through screening criteria to narrow down maps. Is there any objection to the waiving of that previous motion at the last meeting so that we can instead ask ourselves what criteria we want to use? Because I think we were in haste to think we could get there today.
I would like to discuss that motion, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have folks in the queue to talk about specific things, but this is a specific motion and I would welcome it. Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll go ahead and keep my comments to the motion, and then I would still like to be in the queue for other comments.
Yep.
So for me, I am okay with waiving part of that motion, which is that today we were going to get to one map, because I don't think it's fair to do that today, considering that there is a town hall planned for next week in Chugach Eagle River. But after that town hall, I think it is okay for us then at a subsequent committee meeting to narrow down to one map and send that one map to the body for consideration. And the rationale for that, this committee is formed for a reason. And this committee, I think, should be the place where the hard work takes place before it goes to the full body. And as we've talked about in this committee, there's nothing that prevents other members from bringing forward maps. So in the end, we might still have 2 or 3 maps for the body to consider, even if this committee brings forward just one map. But for me, that is where I would like to see us head towards. So absolutely, yes, let's allow multiple maps to go to the town hall and hear all of that feedback. But then in the end, let's get to one map as a committee.
Mr.
Anyone
Chair,
else?
may I say something?
Go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Thank you. I agree that I appreciate everybody willing to let the district that I believe is going to be, could be substantially impacted as well, to have an opinion on the maps there. And we are working on bringing a map forward to be introduced that would be a little bit insightful as well. So I appreciate that our district can have the opportunity to see the maps at our town hall as well. And I'd like to also say that I'm going to probably ask that Claire be involved instead of it just being a town hall where the maps are lined up and people just see it. We're going to go with a full presentation at this point. So thank you, Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the matter? So hearing no one at
Can
this time.
oh,
Oh, go ahead,
Mr.
Austin.
Constant, can I jump in?
Please do.
I want to make sure I heard the exact motion. I agree with what Felix said, that we should be doing the work in this committee. I can't even imagine a scenario where we brought a bunch of maps to the body and then tried to debate that. It seems like it would take all night. And I think our job here is to pick the best map that we all think reflects what we've heard and the legal parameters and what we think makes sense for the next 10 years. And then have an opportunity to debate that map at the assembly meeting. And obviously, as Ms. Allard mentioned, other folks could bring different maps or bring, suggest changes. And so I think there's still that possibility, even if we just bring one, but I think our job is to bring one, and I'm totally fine waiting. I think I want to think about it too. And I have some, legal questions, or I'm looking for a little bit of legal guidance, and want all the town halls to be done before we really select something. And so if that's consistent with your, then I agree.
I think for my part, I would just ask that we rescind the previous motion, and then the committee can make another motion when it's proper, once we've had the conversation as we get through. And so there's nothing to stop the group from remaking a motion. I just want to, if the folks don't mind, rescind what we previously adopted. It's just simple and clean, and then we can make future motions as we move into that process, and that's a fair approach. Okay, so I'm hearing no objections. We're gonna just operate under the notion that now we have a clean slate, that all 10 maps are moving forward to the Eagle River Town Hall, and we will reconvene with another meeting that's not yet scheduled to walk through screening criteria on how to make a decision to narrow down to the map, which will be based on elements such as what we talked about: deviations, communities of interest, what about Eagle River, what are the specific neighborhoods that should be married together, and any other matters that are brought forward as a logical method for us to move through this process. There's a second question, because we're on this topic. Denny Wells, who is one of the members of the public, asked if he could resubmit his map with some slight amendments that he would make based on the testimonies that he heard last night. And then I also heard that from Mr. Hockma. And so my answer to him was, I don't have the authority to say you can, but I can ask the committee. Yeah, Felix, I will come back to your previous comments. I'm just going to dispatch with these two items because we started this conversation, and I want to make sure we get this part taken care of before we move into more debate. That was a response to his comment in the chat. So my question is, do we want to allow those who previously submitted maps to submit to us amended versions based on what they heard from the town halls? And the reason why this is important is because it can't be one. If it's going to be one, it needs to be all are allowed. So put that on the table. Now, this is raising some interest. So I think John was the first one in the queue on this question.
Sorry, the other phone's ringing on us. I would support that, and I think if we don't want them to do it, then I think any of us could work with them and bring it forward on our own. Would that be correct?
Any member can bring forward a substitute version at any time.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
yes,
I'd be okay with them bringing something forward, but I mean, that would be an alternative that would be acceptable for me too, just to work. I mean, you know, I think the public who submitted maps, they did good work, you know, and I think, you know, let's embrace the public, you know, and let them tweak it based on what they heard. And I think there's a lot of value in what they brought. I'm really impressed with the work and appreciate it.
me too. Ms. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, for my part, I'm totally fine with the map makers making adjustments. I think there should be some type of deadline though, because I think at some point, you know, we are going to want the final maps after whatever adjustments are made, and then you know we as a committee are going to want to make adjustments to the map, and so there needs to be enough time. Because what I don't want to happen is, you know, we start making adjustments to maps and then one of the map makers decides to bring a new version in the middle of that whole process. So I think it'll convolute and complicate it too much. So I think having some type of deadline would be appropriate.
I have an idea for that, having looked at my calendar just now, but first, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's a okay idea. I'm fine with some of the map makers making adjustments to their maps after some discussion that they heard and after seeing other maps last night. Actually, I think that makes perfect sense. And so I would have no problem moving forward with that. And I was thinking, you know, maybe a week from today would be a deadline because that would be after the Eagle River Town Hall. Just throwing that date out there.
Yeah, Mr. Peterson, thank you. That date first came to me, but I think that it's proper to wait until the following Monday, because if we're going to give the drafters meaningful time to make changes, I don't know that we should give them less than 24 hours, right? And so it's either the 4th or the 7th that I think are the two proper dates.
Okay, I'm fine with the 7th. Thanks.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yeah, sorry, is anyone else in the queue? I didn't look at the chat first. I should have.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess my concern would be I'd want to hear, I think it's fine to let them make changes and that's helpful. My concern would be making changes in a time frame that allows the contractor to look at those maps and do sort of a screening on it like they've done with the others. And also to the extent that I'm asking for more feedback on the maps and more sort of legal analysis, I wouldn't want them to turn it in on the 7th. And then, you know, if we need to make a decision as the committee that week, I think to get something on the February 15th agenda on the addendum, I wouldn't want to get them last minute. So I guess I would actually push for, if they know what the changes are, that they get them in, you know, toward the end of next week. And then we have a few days for the contractor to get back to us. And then we have a few days to make a decision and write whatever memo we need to.
Okay, so we have two dates on the table, and I would just ask for the body for a motion. Pick one, tell me.
Well, Mr. Bronson, before we do that, could we hear from Dennis or Ashley, if she's here, just about the timing and how they envision us being able to submit something on the addendum? Because I think that's important.
Right, and so the addendum deadline would be noon on the 11th. And Dennis, the question is, what kind of timeline would you need if you received 4 additional amended versions that had some modification?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd actually like to defer to Ashley since she's closely running the GIS mapping team. So Ashley, if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Dennis and Mr. Chair. Given that they are expected to be minor changes, what we would need to do is run them through our system, of course, to check for the compliance, but we also need to keep in mind that we then need to map them on the public mapper, and we would have to redo the print maps. So for us on our end, it would take, I would say, for each map that comes in, 3 hours to update the maps as well as run it through the compliance check. So one of the outstanding ones for me would be the new map coming potentially from Eagle River. And that one would take some more time because that involves building these maps from the ground up. So if we could move the deadline as soon as reasonably possible for people to submit their amendments, that would be really helpful. But either way, we will make sure that it's done in time.
All right, so the queue is a bit muddy right now. I think that next we have Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I'm not following correctly. There was a reference to a new map. So is that an 11th map that we're talking about? Could you clarify
Yeah,
that, please?
so Ms. Allard said that she is working with someone to present an alternative map. And we just have to all recognize the fact that any member has the right to make an amendment proposal. And
Got it.
so
Yeah.
that's separate from the maps we're asking from the folks who've already drafted maps and who have asked, a couple of them have asked if they can submit amended maps. So we'll keep this tailored narrowly to that set of people. And I think in order to save Ashley a little bit of time, we can restrict the map makers to one map only amended. So then that would be maximum of 4. So approximately 12 hours. And the earliest possible, if we're going to comply with what Ashley's request is, I think is the 4th at 5 p.m. Which, doesn't really save you because it's the weekend after that, but, or the 7th. So these are the 2 dates I think that we're looking at still.
I wouldn't go later than the 4th, Mr. Constant.
Would you make that motion?
Sure. I move that we allow map makers who have previously submitted maps to make small corrections following the town halls, and they must be submitted by 5 p.m. on February 4th.
I second. Oh, I'm not on the committee. Can I speak to that motion?
When we
Chair?
get a second, hold on.
Okay.
I will second that.
Weddleton, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So Mr. Rivera seconded. Go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I have to, I just wanted to make it clear that I'm working on this with a group, but I also want to say that it's possible it'll be such a minor additional map that we may just amend, and whatever you guys agree on, we'll fully come forward with the deadlines and we'll meet the deadlines that are presented.
Great. And from the practical perspective, you are not constrained by this deadline, but we would welcome your accomplishment of this deadline, whichever one we choose.
Yeah, we'll work hard to do that. Thank you.
So is there any objection to the motion that we adopt a deadline of 5 p.m. on the 4th to allow previous map makers who've submitted to amend their maps? I'm hearing no objection, so that motion carries unanimously, and that will now be communicated. I'm not sure it'll either be I think it should be Ashley and Dennis who communicate that to these folks, because you guys have had communications with them, right?
Correct, Mr. Chair. I can communicate that.
Thank you, and it's just let them know that the committee has unanimously agreed to allow them to submit an amended map no later than the Friday the 4th at 5 p.m., including feedback from the Eagle River Town Hall.
Mr. Chair, may
Yep.
I ask that that email or communication be distributed to all map makers who submitted from the public? I just want to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity.
That's what I'm suggesting. Ashley has connected
Okay.
with all in the process of getting the maps in compliance and uploaded. And so I think they're perfectly positioned to make that communication. But Ashley, would you CC Claire and myself, and then Claire can also share that communication with all members.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So now that we've dispatched with all of that, this is kind of the list of things I needed to do. Let's roll back up. Mr. Rivera, you had a comment in the queue up above many, many moons ago.
Yeah, thank you. This is going to feel a little bit disjointed, but I want to go a little bit back to that conversation we were having previously about the maps and how they impact different areas. And I appreciate the member from East Anchorage talking about Rogers Park and Airport Heights. As folks on this committee will know, I have been critical of how these maps impact Midtown. And, I have been somewhat harsh on how these maps impact Midtown. And, we'll continue to work to see how some of the very historical and traditional Midtown neighborhoods can stay and maintain their Midtown identity. I also realized that there are a lot of other considerations outside of Midtown. So, this is going to be a bit of a process. And I think that leads perfectly to my process question, which is, obviously for these maps to even be in front of us, they had to go through some type of sort of checkbox or rubric exercise to make sure that they met the basic standards. So, I wanted to see, when we get to that point that we are grading these maps, what are all of those standards? And I know that there's a great slide in the presentation that is done at the various town halls or other venues that talks about those standards. But, I would love to see us grade these maps in those standards. And, obviously there are going to be gradients for us of, do these maps fit with the idea of contiguous districts? Do they fit with the idea of socioeconomically integrated districts? Do they fit with the idea of community of interest? And we're going to grade the maps differently, each of us. So, for me, I'm just very curious, when we get to the nuts and bolts of it, which I realize we aren't doing today, how we're going to grade those so that we can get to some type of map in the end that may be one of these with some changes. I don't know what it's going to look like, but for me, that process question is still one I'm very curious to explore further. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera, and I agree that is the question of the day that we have to kind of get through. I don't think we're going to get through it in this committee meeting, but we'll have to do some research and come back and have a conversation narrowly tailored to the question of screening criteria and methodologies. So, Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. I support that too, as I'm in the discussions coming up with, what are these criteria? Yeah, there is one thing that, the frequent reference to District 4 is Midtown, and I know it's been called that. I've never viewed it as Midtown. I view it as Abbott Loop. So that needs to be factored in. It's and that may be because I'm in the Abbott Loop Community Council. I live in Independence Park, which really belongs in the Abbott Loop Assembly District more than Hillside. In fact, on the Hillside District Plan, Independence Park was specifically carved out because it's so different from the rest of Hillside. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I know there's reasons to hold, Rogers Park and Airport Heights as a community in its own, so they're not split perhaps, but that they would be in the Abbott Loop / Midtown Assembly District. I don't think that needs to be. I mean, I can tell there's an affinity for that from both Felix and Meg, but as I've looked at over the years, it's always seemed weird that Independence Park is in South Anchorage. And at any rate, but I hope we don't lose sight of that. Thanks.
And I'm going to put myself in the queue there and just say that, sending downtown to Northern Lights is equally as confounding and absurd, right? And so therein lies the dilemma of how we sort through this. So the downtown must grow, but is in fact that district including Midtown? And so these are the questions we're going to have to kind of get through to the bottom of. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to make it very clear on the record that I am also a member of the Abbott Loop Community Council. So this is a question that is also near and dear to my heart of, what do we do with Abbott Loop? And, for me, Abbott Loop can go in either the Midtown District or the South Anchorage District, but as long as Abbott Loop is kept together, I think that is the critical and an important piece for us to consider. So, it's going to be an interesting discussion when we get there. Thanks.
So Mr. Gates has put himself in the queue for a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I just asked a comment about, the names that we're all accustomed to for the different districts. And we do have, some of this is an outgrowth of simply living here and recognizing, the different communities and areas. But we also have in our municipal code, section 22510, name some election districts. And in there, you know, I actually have a draft ordinance because after this, we need to amend this section to change District 1 downtown from 1 member to 2. But I also noted that we have District 4 in the code is called Central Anchorage, but I've never actually heard or seen anyone in the media or publicly call any district Central Anchorage. We use Midtown, so I was going to change that. But I asked to speak because, you know, what we're accustomed to doesn't necessarily need to be what you design or boundaries around. Downtown Anchorage moving to encompass some of Jayborough or Midtown or however it's changing. Maybe you don't want to call it downtown anymore and going forward in the future. So that's just something to think about. You could call it something else. And I don't want to throw out names, but I just want to put on the table that you're not tied down to the traditional names for the districts as you go through this process. We get an end result.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gates. Anyone else on this topic? Recognizing that the committee leadership will spend some time with the contractors and staff to think through a preliminary framework around screening criteria that will be brought forward, and we'll be ready for that talk. Okay, I'm not seeing any. We've actually done quite a lot of work today. I know we have another hour that we're scheduled for. How would the committee like to use that time, or would they like to reclaim that time? Mr. Wheeler has his hand up. Go ahead, Dennis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to help fill the time here a little bit. There are 2 things that came out of the town hall last night that were technical in nature. I just wanted to advise the committee on these. One is there was a request for more of the underlying shape files related to the public submissions, and so we're working to provide that so members of the public can have that underlying information. And there was a second request regarding folks who struggle with color blindness, and if we could come up with some maps that might be more friendly to those with that issue, and so we're working on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. That's really great. Mr. Weddleton in the queue.
Thanks. So, you know, I had down that we were just at 10:30, but if we have another hour, you know, this would be a good time to start talking about these screening criteria. At least maybe just brainstorm throughout what we've got and sort through as much as we can. Do we have till 11:30? Is that the schedule?
I think we are scheduled to 11:30. You are volunteered as tribute, Mr. Weddleton.
Beg your pardon?
You are volunteered as tribute. You can begin.
Okay, so I'm just making some notes as we go along. So one is what deviation is acceptable. I penciled in 3. That's totally random. Maps were 5 or below, and some were quite low. And then, you know, for me, least change possible. You know, people are used to the certain districts as they are. But that can't always be met, but should be someone thinking together. Neighborhoods together, you know, so I think Rogers Park and, you know, certainly Bay Shore, places like that have a real strong identity. So that's important. Community of interest, which is somewhat like neighborhoods together. They're all maybe the same thing, but I've not got a super clear idea of what community interest is. That might need to be fleshed out for me at any rate. And then approximating state precincts, not really. I think house districts is more the thing, and I understand that's not possible either. But I think that's somewhat useful for the average person because they don't distinguish well between city and state, even voting. You know, I'm sure we're all getting questions about how ranked choice voting is going to go this April. And just help out. I mean, that's the reality. You know, it's more simple. We can keep things, the better. So I just jotted those down. Obviously, there's, you know, more, you know, but I'm happy to add to the list from anyone.
So Mr. Rivera put himself in you.
Yeah, thank you. I like most of the things that are on Mr. Weddleton's list. I will say, you know, for my part, I don't want the criteria on any of these specific things to necessarily be a number. So I think having a better sort of legal framework and understanding of, let's just pick on deviation as an example. Mr. Weddleton said, 3 deviation, there are gradients here, right? Obviously, the maps that we have go from, 0.12% deviation to 7% or something like that deviation. Just getting a better understanding so that we can each sort of grade that in our own way of, whether this is a good enough deviation or not, I think is critically important. For my part, there was one, I think, thing on Mr. Weddleton's list that I have a little bit of an issue with, which is taking into account the state house boundaries. In particular because one, we don't know if they're going to change substantially after these lawsuits. I mean, who knows? It's likely not. It's likely going to be the Senate pairings that change substantially, but who knows? And two, I don't think historically have looked at state house pairings, state house boundaries rather, too much when we do our districts, because there are plenty of examples where there are community councils where a lot of, as an example, a lot of different senators or representatives go to because they're sort of in the middle of boundaries. It's the same thing with our assembly districts, so sort of a hodgepodge, especially Midtown, right? It's a hodgepodge of, I think, 3 different Senate boundaries and quite a few different House representatives that are all in Midtown. So, it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it should be part of our criteria list. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy in the queue. If you're speaking, you're muted, Ms. Kennedy.
No, it takes a while to get everything working. I, like you this morning, if things just working the way they should be. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to add something in regard to the factor that talks about districts being compact and contiguous and relatively integrated. The contiguous is kind of the one that I want to really have a little more maybe definition to, because that, for my district, if we're looking at putting us with Girdwood, and I've mentioned this before, that's about a 75, 80, could be as much as 90 miles from one end of my district to that area. That's a pretty large landmass, and it's certainly a long way to travel. So I would hope that we would include with that compact and contiguous factor, that we would also take into consideration the connections on the road system. Because obviously we need roads to get to where we're going in a particular district. And the only thing that is contiguous about some of those maps is a very large mountain range between the two. So anyway, so we need to be able to take into consideration the actual road system and the connectedness for transportation purposes. So I'd appreciate it if there was something that highlighted that really important factor. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I put myself in the queue, and so I did some homework last night thinking about this very issue, and I personally am in full agreement with you on the Girdwood issue. I don't believe that that's in any way possible. When I step outside of my front door and I walk down my driveway to the side of the road and I look left 90 degrees, I see the J-Bear gate. The Government Hill gate is literally in view shed from where I stand at my lot line. And it's right there, and I can see it every morning when I leave my home. And so then what I did was I plugged in from Eagle River proper to Government Hill, the drive time, and it's 16 minutes. And then I put in the Eagle River drive time to Hilltop, and it's 20 minutes, a 4-minute difference driving from where you live to Government Hill versus not where you live, but the heart of Eagle River to Government Hill and the heart of Eagle River to Hilltop. But then, of course, it's an hour and 20 minutes to get to Girdwood. And so I think you're absolutely on the point that it's impossible for a district to span that far and have reasonable representation. So the road connectedness is important. It's a factor that I think we have to consider. And the fact, the one item that I actually don't necessarily agree with Mr. Weddleton's list is, and the way he framed it is proper, least change is possible, but there's substantial change mandated by this process. So by virtue of that, there will be substantial change. So I want us to be careful how we talk about that. Because that's just simply the reality of this. You know, what we could have done is I could not have pushed for a ballot proposition to add the 12 seat. Believe me, some members asked me not to. And then I would have been fighting to move the single member district, and this would have been a much easier conversation. But I think the work we're doing is very important for the equity and balance in this municipality for the future. Ms. Allard.
Thank you. And you're right. I do believe you're super close to that one area of government gate. And I would also state that it literally takes me from my house, which I'm 4 miles off the freeway. So if I was in Eagle River proper, I could also make it to government gate to post in the quarters within 15 minutes door to door. But I'd also like to say, just for clarification, so last night I wasn't at the meeting. I had to take my daughters to ski practice at Hilltop. It took me 45 minutes. It's not 20 minutes, it's 45 minutes because of how we get there. So maybe as a bird flies, and it's true, reality is we've got to figure this out. And I just hope we can all come to, not everybody's going to be happy. We all know that. We all have to give a little bit in order to make this District 1 work. And I'm willing to do that. And I just wanted to say that there was a part where, if we all agree at some point, and I'm speaking on behalf of our community, that J-Bear is left with Eagle River, but Northeast Muldoon is taken, we've met our 48,000. So I don't know. We'll figure it all out. And I look forward to figuring it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Is anyone else wishing to step in on the conversation about screening criteria that we have opened up on Mr. Weddleton's behest? So no one else is putting themselves in their queue. Oh, wait, Mr. Weddleton's put himself back. Dive on in, John.
And I didn't want my list to say, hey, this is all inclusive. That was just what I jotted down during a conversation. I mean, there's clearly more. I just wanted to get it started. I understand your thing, least change possible. I mean, I know we have to have dramatic, but but that is also an element in how much we weigh that. I don't know. And then I said deviation below 3, totally random. I mean, Felix is right. Any of these it's all very squishy, so I appreciate that. But I think if anyone's we should just be brainstorming here and throw something out, and then maybe we'll have them filtered out. And that was my intent. Thanks.
So John, interestingly, and I put myself in the queue there, I picked 2 different numbers on deviation for screening criteria just for my own exercise a couple days ago. And if you screen at 5%, you get 7 maps of the 10 we have delivered. And if you screen at 4%, you get 5 maps remaining. And so, and I'm not suggesting, like Mr. Rivera said, he doesn't want to see a number. Okay, that's fine. But that is a very effective screening tool, is starting with a deviation that we're all comfortable with to get us to the point where we have a basis of maps that we can consume meaningfully and thoughtfully, and not spend the resources sending our contractors doing all the deep dive work on 10 maps when a number of them are just not going to pass the test. And so it might be iterative in some ways, the screening criterion, where we do some things that are more blunt force or kind of on the chopping block, and then we get into the more refined questions after that. But I believe what's going to happen, as Claire put in the chat, she's taking notes. And sure, you can go ahead and share your screen on this. These notes will be used to help us hone in on the process that between Mr. Wheeler, Claire, and myself, we will come forward with a framework that we want to present to the committee. The committee can do whatever it wants with that. That's the approach I'm intending. But yes, brainstorm if there are other ideas. I mean, there's the Voting Rights Act information that's not up there, so I would add VRA concerns.
Mr. Constant and Claire, can I ask a clarifying question about this list?
Please.
So this is just a list of things that members have identified, right? This isn't necessarily a list of the legal parameters. Like for instance, number 2, the least change possible. I don't know if that's actually a standard I'll be using, because to me, the other standards are more important, which is to make the district, fit all the legal parameters. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so I'll jump in there, and John put himself in the queue, but I think he was pretty clear. This is a brainstorm list. It's not a list of the criteria. And so the idea is let's put down as many methodologies as people have in their minds. And then, but the legal questions are going to be the ones that we can't avoid, right? And so that's where Dean, I guess I'll include Dean in the process as well. So Dean and Dennis and Claire, when we kind of take this list, we'll come back with a thoughtful approach that we have a
great.
conversation.
Yeah, it would be so great for you all to advise us that, like, here are the things you have to have, and here are some of the things you might consider, but that aren't required, or some way to divide them. Because I really want to be looking at making sure we're meeting the legal standards, and then from there, sort of making my own judgment. And we all should be doing that based on our neighborhoods and what we're hearing, et cetera.
100%. Mr. Weddleton, you want to respond to that?
No, I think that's fine. I do have a question though. Like I've heard stated a number of times that Anchorage is by definition socioeconomically integrated. And I guess I need to know what that means. A lot of the work we do, if you do road planning projects and stuff like that, you have to, we don't treat ourselves as socioeconomically integrated. We say, okay, well, Fairview has this thing, Mountain View, you look at, different, neighborhoods are treated a little bit differently. But my takeaway on this, we are socioeconomically integrated, so we don't have to worry about that. And if I'm wrong on that, happily to be corrected, but I just don't have a good definition of what that means.
And I see that Mr. Gates has his hand raised, so that's the proper person to tackle that big whopper of a question.
Well, I actually didn't ask to speak about that definition of economically integrated. I do know that I've read some case law that discusses what that means, and I would rather wait to come back to that, as you've asked, with the legal memo about all these factors. So I apologize. I don't want to answer the social economic integrated and what exactly it means right now. A lot of it has to do with, the community and how they interact with each other, the economy. It's sort of like, in terms of what Ms. Kennedy and some other members were talking about, Goodwood and Eagle River, there's not a lot of economy between the two communities, right? So that's sort of a less degree of social economic integration if they're in the same district. Anyway, that doesn't mean that would be a prohibited thing. It's just one of the things to evaluate. Anyways, I asked to speak about that first bullet under the ideas to help make further decisions. What would be an acceptable deviation, for example? And I guess as the legal matter, above 10% is presumptively invalid, and 5 to 10%, it just gets a hard look. But I think trying to set criteria where we say we're going to eliminate maps, that are more than 4% deviation or 3%, it's sort of a misapplication of the rule. That's the legal standard. And then beyond that, you should look at the other factors, because a lot of times, 0% deviation is perfect population equality, but as we see around the country, that's not really possible. When you want to have all these other factors in consideration, that's where you're allowed to deviate. So maybe there's a map at 7% deviation, which is so much better in terms of the compact, continuous, and socioeconomic integration. That's preferable over a map with 1% deviation.
So Dean, I'm gonna interrupt you now.
I would just caution against saying we're going to eliminate maps over 4%, and that does help narrow down the field, sure, but there might be one that's just makes so much more sense with all the other factors, deviation aside. Sorry.
Thank you. So what I'm going to ask for, Claire, is add another category to the list, and that's questions. We need to sort through. And so, or just questions, which is fine. And the first question is the definition of the legal standard of what was the term you used there, John? Socioeconomic.
Socioeconomically integrated.
Okay, so there's the definition of that. There's the bounds of what Dean was just talking about, which is the deviation. What are the bounds of the deviation? How should we view compact, contiguous, those constitutional and charter driven elements? Other questions, other criteria? I see Mr. Rivera put himself in the queue.
Thanks. I think Miss Kennedy was in the queue ahead of
I'm
me.
sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Crystal. I'm sorry I missed you.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate the definition on the deviation too, because that's something that, what we had in the presentations we've been doing is a line that says a single district with an over 5% deviation must have a compelling reason. So I think that was, to me, told me that there was some flexibility. It wasn't that zero was, was the goal. It was certainly desirable, but 5% might be necessary considering specific situations. So I really appreciate the fact that we have some flexibility in that deviation. It would be nice to know whether or not the deviation is actually a 5%, which, like I said, we have in our presentation here, or if it could go as high as 10. So anyway, we've had that conversation. So just interested in finding out what the answer to that is. But the other thing I wanted to think is I think there is value in just being practical and reasonable and realistic as well. So I'd kind of like to add that on there. One of the things that does seem to be just way out there is the idea of putting Chugach, Eagle River together with Girdwood. And there are other places that you all would probably say the same thing about in certain areas, of Anchorage. So I don't want to discount that, because I think that goes and speaks to that whole reason why we may have that flexibility in that 5% deviation, because we want to do something that actually makes sense. So I don't want to discount that. I want us to make sure that we can actually look at this and we don't go to the extent that the state has in so many cases, with the gerrymandering. I mean, the fact that a Matsu senator represents Valdez just blows my mind. So we don't want to go to that extent either, to where it just doesn't look like it's reasonable or practical. So I hope we'll keep that as part of the considerations too. Thanks.
So Miss Quinn Davidson briefly put in the chat, curious who said Sand Lake asked to be kept together, and that was Mr. Wells last night in the conversation. So Mr. Rivera in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really, really appreciate Mr. Gates's comment, because that is sort of spot on with what I've been trying to say, but I guess not very well, which is that, I think it's important that we really, and I'll keep hammering this, that we really have gradients as we're discussing all of these, because there's 6 people on this committee, and there's probably going to be 6 different definitions of what might be an acceptable deviation, just to use as an example. But even if there is a map that isn't acceptable deviation wise, it may have all these other criteria where it might actually be pretty acceptable. So I think this is just going to be a multifaceted process that, I think using one criteria as the axe, I just don't think that's very wise. I think we need to look at it from a much more holistic standpoint. For me, I would like to see if we can make sure that we're using as broad of a definition of communities of interest as possible. One of the things that's important to me, and this might be a different criteria altogether, or it could be included in communities of interest, but it's making sure that we're keeping sort of the core of those districts intact. And I think we're all going to have different ideas of what the core is. I mean, I can say what I think the core of Midtown is, and Austin might have a specific idea of what the core of West Anchorage is. And so I think that for me is, although not a legal standard, I think it's an important standard.
Thank you. Next in the queue, I think Mr. Gates had his hands up. Mr. Gates.
Yes, thank you. I guess I just asked to follow up a little bit. It is, of course, better if deviation is 5% or below, you know, as near as practicable to below the acceptable level. So when I mentioned a 7%, maybe better, I think you really, like Ms. Kennedy said and we've said in presentations, you really need compelling interest while a map below 5% deviation, you know, just doesn't cut it in terms of these other factors. So you need to go above, you know. So, I mean, the under 5% criteria for screening maps is a good one. I was cautioning against saying 4 or 3, but you do, I guess, deviation is the legal goal and 5% is the legal standard. So if you can't find a map below 5% that really sort of meets all these other factors acceptable in an acceptable way, and you find one that going above just sort of keeps the social economic integration so much better than any below 5%, then you've got more justification to look that way.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Yep. And now Mr. Peterson just put himself in the queue. Austin, I see you're in the queue and I have myself in the queue, but he hasn't spoken. So Mr. Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, we have spoken earlier about allowing the map makers to make adjustments to their maps. And so until we, excuse me, until we see what the final adjustments are, we're not actually going to know who's going to be over 5% or you know 3% or whatever. And so I just thought maybe we needed to keep that in mind, because someone who's over 5% now may make a couple of small adjustments and be down in the 3% range. And so all of a sudden their map could be one that would be more acceptable. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks. Not to be too nitpicky, and I don't know exactly what we're doing with these notes, but I guess I would ask, at least for Sand Lake, that it says individuals from these neighborhoods have made specific requests. I wouldn't want it to appear like the community councils have done resolutions or something, unless of course that's the case, but just sort of for accuracy. Thanks.
Thanks. I have myself in the queue. And Austin, that one thing that he said last night, or somebody said last night, I found very interesting, and it was kind of a paradigm shift for me, is he called it the Lakes District of Anchorage. And you have Jewel Lake, Sand Lake, and Campbell Lake. And I thought that was a very intriguing way to see it, because that's all moraine and it's interesting. So just as a philosophical conversational point.
And definitely there is some connection there. I mean, for instance, I was fat biking on Sand Lake, and there's an area that you go through that's, you know, sort of wetlands in the summer that takes you directly to Jewel Lake. And that's a really common area that people, you know, go between the two, and they're quite close. You could argue, of course, that Lake Hood, I mean, there's sort of other lakes in the west as well. And honestly, I think all of the maps keep West Anchorage pretty similar. It's just whether we move from Minnesota to sea or, you know, above or below Campbell Lake. So I don't think it matters. I just want to be fair to all of the people who might not have that position, and if we've only heard it from one individual.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Spinard was included in that whole section, basically from Spinard Lake down is the Lake District. I never thought of it. That's just kind of curious and interesting. I appreciate seeing our town in different ways. So I have 2 points that I would like to make. One that I would add to the top criteria is the under the idea of communities of interest, I would like it to contemplate what the municipality's business is in the context of the communities of interest. And so this gets really to the point of what services are provided and how are those areas served by the people who represent them. Because again, if I were required to represent a neighborhood that was all wells and septic, I'd have a lot of problems because I don't have a lot of knowledge and experience in that topic. But if another person were brought into my district where I have lots of experience in neighborhoods of high levels of diversity, economic disinvestment, real trauma, it would be hard for some people to pick that up too. So I want to make sure we draw a line toward the actual municipal nexus of these questions. And further, I want us to be very careful to avert or avoid politics, like how people voted in X race or Y race. To me, it's not, census and reapportionment is not about the political boundaries. It's about where people live. And we know we have somewhere between 10 and 45% voter participation. And so if we're doing our work to contemplate where people are, how people are voting, then we are disserving all of those people who are residents of those neighborhoods and who should be represented too. And then finally, my next point is on the issue of deviation, the 5%, 10%. I think the caution that we should all take on that it is a number, there is that 5% threshold, but what the courts said in that 2002 ruling was the technologies have changed to the point where you can be more discreet. And in 20 years, the technology has expanded extraordinarily to the point where a deviation, even though it might seem rational at 5%, isn't no longer rational because of the tools that we have to be more discreet. And so I want us to be very conscientious of that part of the issue of deviation. What the legal standard is that led us to here is not necessarily the legal standard we'll face under a legal scrutiny going forward because of the shifting technologies that they referenced 20 years ago when the internet was barely 10 years old. So any other members wish to be heard? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. We've kind of whipped through this. We have a lot of information on the table. The next question is, when are we going to meet? And I haven't looked at the calendar, but I would think the 7th or the 8th would be the time to meet. Is there any objection to me looking at those 2 days for the calendar?
That works for me, Mr. Constant, but I would just say, let's make sure the contractor, if they're getting the new maps Friday afternoon, will they have time by Monday to do any sort of analysis? I just want to make sure we're involving them.
So maybe then the Tuesday is a better date than the Monday. And for the most part, we may or may not get to the question of a map or 2 maps or 3 maps. We might only get to the question of establishing a review criteria, but we'll see what happens. So I'll aim for the 8th because that's a very important perspective that the contractor has the time to get through whatever data that they need. And someone asked me last night, what's the rush? And for my part, it's very simple. After the state plan map was drawn and published, it is now official that there should be a 12th member of this body and that I should have a partner in my work. And that is an injustice every day that goes by that we don't have that person here working with me. It's unfair to the residents of my district. And so for me, that's the time pressure that I'm going to keep my foot on the gas pedal, that we drive to the finish as efficiently as possible without, of course, sacrificing the quality of our work. Ms. Allard. If you're speaking, you're on mute. Can't hear you, Miss Allard. You have the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Zolotel. I apologize. I was like, I wonder where she... Anyways, I apologize. Right. And I get what you're saying, because I understand that you represent a large population, and we have 2 because we have 50,000. You have 1, you have 25. And I know that we were supposed to pass that around where there's 1 person per district, and it never happened. But I wanted to also just chime in a little bit about the demographics again and time frame. But the bottom line is, I apologize. The bottom line is, on the 8th, I'm going to be in the air and I will be flying somewhere. Can you tell me, Chair, about when you're going to have that meeting? And I'm going to really, really push to make sure that those, if there are changes or amendments or another map, I want to get it into you guys super fast, possibly Tuesday or Wednesday, to give as much possible time for anybody to review those. Do you have a time for Tuesday yet, possibly?
No, No, I don't.
Okay.
What's your travel
Because I
schedule?
really want to participate, and I apologize. I really do want to participate in this.
What is your travel schedule that day?
I believe we're leaving like at 7 a.m. We come down at different things. I could send it to you because when I land in Seattle or LA, because we're going to Florida, if the meeting's in between there, I'll just hop on. I don't want everybody putting their schedule around that, but I will try to attend. Absolutely. But I'll let you know when I come down and I have those breaks in between.
So there appears to be nothing on the calendar for that day.
Okay. I think,
and-
honestly, I think it's between like 9:30 and 11:30 that I'll have a break in Seattle, Seattle time. So
So
I don't know.
John
We'll
and
figure it out.
Austin put into the queue that the 9th works better for them.
Okay.
And so, or
Oh, that
also,
would be awesome. Okay.
so
Okay.
is there any objection then to meeting on the 9th? I'm not hearing any objection to that. And so
Thank you, Austin. Thank you, John.
then we will, Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair, what time frame are we looking at? Have we looked at a time frame on that day?
we have not yet, and there are a couple of meetings in chambers that night, so we aren't going to be able to use chambers. And 155 is being used for Board of Adjustment from 10 until noon. And I'm thinking maybe we should try to do this meeting in person. So Austin is free only before 2 on Wednesday.
I would be free before 2 on Wednesday as well, but yeah, late afternoon and evening, I've got a bunch of community councils, which they'll want to be weighing in by that time.
So if we're going to be in person, we can't do before 2, or we can't do before noon, actually. And they'll be in that room. It'll take some time.
Could we possibly do Monday in person? Just a thought.
So we talked about that, but the contractor will be receiving the maps and needing time to get them updated and ready. So we need to go Tuesday or Wednesday. So kind of come back to Tuesday. Would Tuesday evening work? It's normally a meeting night. It'd be an unusual time, but we could get together. There's no conflicts anywhere on the calendar, the official calendar.
What time did you say? Sorry.
After work on Tuesday, and 12 to 2 might work, but really 12:15 to 2, because it's going to take the Board of Adjustment time to finish their work. They're in 155. So John says Tuesday evening works.
I'm okay with that.
So Austin is tied up Tuesday. We're making sausage on the calendar right now. From 6 to 7.
I land at 10 o'clock on that day. Can you, and it's a 4-hour difference. That puts us at 6.
So
Yeah, and
7
I'm
o'clock.
open to that. Yeah,
I
just
hate
Zoom
to
on.
do such a late meeting, but would people consider 7 to 9 on Tuesday?
If you guys did, I would appreciate it. I will.
Works for me.
And Chair, can I just make a comment really quick? I mean, I know everybody wants those amendments and that they probably want to get them Friday. Would anybody object if we turned them in sooner to include me with any of the changes, and then
Absolutely.
we could all meet in person on Monday? I mean, I'm
Dunbar's
open to
principle-
pushing the time frame.
Mr. Dunbar's principle is that deadline is a ceiling, not a goal. So yes, as early as.
Okay. Yeah, if we turned them in sooner, could we possibly do that?
I'm hearing some talking over. I'm missing something. So
If
I heard
we
you,
turned
Allard.
in our, I'm sorry, if we turned in our amendments sooner.
Oh, wait, hold on 1 second.
Ms. Bauer, you are unmuted. There you go. Go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Thanks. I'm open to turning in anything sooner, even if it's Wednesday, and that gives everybody, the individuals who need to go over it, the people we've contracted, so we could move and meet on Monday. Is that something that the group is open to?
if the contractors can produce the work by Monday evening, then we can do Monday evening. Let me look at the calendar, just to make sure there's not something there. But I don't know, Dennis, your thoughts on that? Ashley, I guess, really?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to Ashley.
Mr. Chair, if we receive the materials from the submitters Friday at 5 p.m., it would be a massive push to get it done by Monday. If we receive the materials, move the submission update for them to supply their amendments to Wednesday, then absolutely.
So the problem with Wednesday is the Eagle River Town Hall is Thursday. And so the idea was to allow the map drafters the opportunity to hear the comments from Eagle River as well before submitting final maps. If that's no longer the germane principle, then yes, we could ask the maps to come in early.
Well, I guess this is Jamie. I guess I know this is like craziness, but if Miss Kennedy, I haven't put out to the public yet for Thursday. I don't know. And I'm wondering, we have a meeting on Tuesday, Wednesday. Is it possible it would early Thursday work, and I'll get with Miss Kennedy and see if we can move our date to Wednesday if everybody is open to that in my district, if nobody else minds. But I'll ask Miss Kennedy and I could get back to you after the meeting. And then you guys could just
Mr.
put out
Chair,
the information.
Miss Kennedy,
Mr. Chair, can we get back? Can we actually look at a calendar? Because I think people are confusing the weeks we're talking about. I think
Okay.
everybody's saying Wednesday and Thursday, but that's two different Wednesdays and two different Thursdays. So can
Right,
we
no.
actually use dates? If we use
Sure.
okay, because the 3rd of February is the date for the town hall in Eagle River. But we
Right.
were looking at whether or not to have a meeting on the 7th or the 8th.
And we were asking that maps be finalized and submitted by the 4th.
Correct. So, yeah, so I think we all need to maybe be looking at a calendar so we know exactly what days we're talking about.
And then the contractor said it's really not feasible for them to have all the maps uploaded by the 7th. It's really the 8th is the most practical day, the first practical day we could meet. So the 8th and the 9th are the days we are really looking at. And that Ms. Allard is traveling on the 8th. Yep, go ahead.
Can you remind me why we can't meet Wednesday before 2?
No, we can. It's just 12:15 because that room is taken till noon. We can't just set up and get in there. And I think this really should be an in-person meeting. We can.
Well, could we meet in 155? Is that not available?
That's the room that's occupied from 10 until noon. But really, if it's 10 till noon, it could be 10 till.
I guess I'm asking Miss Kennedy if we could change the meeting to 2 February instead of 3 February. Let our community see the maps, turn them into the team the morning of Thursday the 3rd, and then let the team do everything. And then we can all have an in-person meeting on Monday if everybody's open to that.
Miss Allard, actually, no. I mean, the meeting's been published already. It's posted and it's gone out through the chamber. And then again, like Mr. Constant was saying, that the map people who are going to do this, there's a deadline on the 4th to get all of these maps in, and they can't. It'll take over the weekend for them to get that done.
I know that. That's why I wanted to move the date up. All right,
Well,
I'll just do the best I can and give you guys the maps on Thursday.
Okay, so Barbara asked or put in the chat that we could ask the Board of Adjustment to move upstairs to conference room 240, which is the clerk's conference room. And so if that's the case, then we could schedule from, I would say 11 to 2, not 12 to 2, with the goal of having a 2-hour meeting, but having 3 hours on the calendar, just in case. Is anybody opposed to that? So it appears after much work and coordination, we have landed on the target. I do see a hand up. Let me see who that might be. That's Mr. Wheeler.
I'm opposed only because I want to meet in person and I need to talk to Miss Kennedy so that we can switch things around.
Dennis?
just a reminder, Mr. Chairman, I have another hat, and that includes assisting the Board of Adjustment. So I'll be in their meeting and not available for yours if they overlap, if that matters.
Oh, it matters, but as we're seeing now, I'm not sure what the answer is going to be. It's a moving target. And so I don't think we're going to be able to have a win for everybody on this timeline issue. We can't do Monday. Tuesday evening, I thought was a pretty good idea. Wednesday morning is an option. Past that, we get to unworkable. So I think so Austin asked in the chat, can the Board of Adjustment meeting be changed earlier, 9 to 11, Barbara? I don't know if that's possible. So Barbara will ask, we are going, I think that Wednesday slot is the time that is best. I know that doesn't work for you being on your trip, Miss Allard, but what we can probably do is set up the Facebook
I'm going to
Live.
submit my maps early. I'm going to submit my maps early to them, and hopefully everybody else will. I really want to be there in person. I've changed this trip a few times so I could be more involved with this type of what's going on. I'm going to figure it out. I might have to just change my flight again.
Right.
I really want to be there.
I get that. And
I'll
so
figure it out.
it's looking like we're settling on 11 to 2 o'clock on Wednesday. Let me make sure I get that date right. Wednesday, the 9th. Okay, that was the hardest part of the project from so far. Thank you. Now we have a date. I'm not sure, Claire, is it you who publishes that on the calendar?
I think Mandy's probably keeping track of that.
Barbara suggests pending, oh, that's right, Mandy, pending BOA approval, but I think we'll schedule it anyways. And then if we can't have Dennis for the first hour, then we'll just take on other business. We'll do the legal analysis with Dean, or we'll answer some of these questions. Because I don't want to wait till noon if we only have till 2. So that's the tentative plan, subject to slight changes. Any other items to come before the committee? Thank you. Mr. Wheeler put in the chat the comment that please, members of the public listening, that the portal is still open. And those comments that you make in that place are part of the permanent record in the right place. So please make your comments there, and those will be continually reported to the committee as they come in. That website is reapportionanc.org. It'll be updated in the next several hours with the upcoming meeting information. And is there anything else for the good of the body? Thank you all for your thoughtful input in getting us the slate of questions, slate of screening criterion, and a date to meet next. And here we go. And thank you, everybody. I will adjourn this meeting.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris, for managing everyone, and also wanted to thank Claire. If she hasn't left yet, she's done an amazing job. The two of you have done such a good job getting information out to the public.
Thanks, everybody, and I apologize for asking you to revolve your world around my schedule. Sorry.